Good evening. Welcome to another live stream. We are back for the second in the same number of days. As you can see, I am joined by three very special guests, an incredible panel. Had them on last month, had to get them on again. We are joined by Ray McGovern. He is a former CIA briefer, and I know that he was one of the founders of the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. We have also Larry Johnson, who is a former CIA analyst, and to him, an old fat white guy with an opinion.
Yeah.
He's great, though. But without further ado, we also have Glenn Diesen, who is a geopolitical analyst and a professor at the University of, what was that, South Eastern Norway?
Yeah, that's correct.
Great. All right, everybody, hit the like button as we get started. That helps boost the stream in YouTube's algorithm. And without further ado, I wanted to start perhaps with you, Larry. Let us begin. It has been a very chaotic day. We saw tariffs on the entire world go into play, and then immediately within hours, we saw all of them be paused for 90 days, except for 120+% tariffs on China. Of course, China has retaliated with tariffs on major U.S. imports, export bans on rare earth minerals, and that tariff is about upwards of 84%. But there's so much going on. There's also U.S. escalations with Iran, Larry. There are indirect talks that are going to be underway in the coming days. And then, of course, we will see what happens from there. The U.S. military is bombing Yemen. And, of course, we still have the Ukraine conflict where Russia is on the offensive. And we also have Russia and Iran speeding up their strategic partnership. So all of this is coming to a head. Trump essentially feels like he's melting down into what has been an incredibly hostile first couple of months under his reign. What do you make of all of this, Larry? What do you find to be pertinent right now in terms of where things are going geopolitically? Because it seems quite dangerous.
That's one of those moments where you say, okay, Mrs. Lincoln, other than that thing, how did you like the play? Okay. So some pretty grim things and potentially hopeful things going on. The big problem is that if people are assuming that Trump has sat down, thought through these issues in a critical fashion, asking questions such as, who stands to benefit or lose the most from the tariffs if we impose tariffs on China? Is China going to be hurt worse, or are we going to be hurt worse? If I start military operations in Yemen, do we have the stockpiles of air defense missiles to sustain our presence while also meeting the goals that we have set for ourselves in the Pacific against China? Do we fully comprehend what Russia and Iran's new partnership is in terms of a strategic cooperation? Now, all different issues. And if you're assuming that Trump is is asking pointed questions in each of those categories, he's not. I know that. I can't really say how I know that, other than someone with access. He is reacting emotionally. He's reacting from his gut. And let's just take the example of China. China, as a percentage of its total trade, the U.S. has become less important to China over the last 3 years. It's still, I've seen estimates between 3% of China's total trade and upwards of 9%. By contrast, the United States sends a lot more in trade to China. And China has been selling off U.S. treasuries and buying gold. In other words, things that if they were looking for a solid relationship with the United States, they would be buying treasuries and selling gold, just the opposite. So Trump has set himself up for a trade war that, based on his assumptions, he thinks he can win. But what I come back and say is look at those assumptions and recognize he can't win. Because I'll close with this one simple example. The U.S. is stepping up its military activities, both trying to support Israel's genocide, still providing support to Ukraine, trying to bomb the stuffing out of the Yemenis, and then also wanting to be ready to go against China. We need missiles, and artillery shells. But I can take you through each of the categories and show you that in all the major, whether they're talking HIMARS or ATACMS, they no longer make those. One of the critical ingredients for the explosives is called antimony. Who produces antimony? That would be China. And between China, there are two alternatives. If we don't get it from China, we can buy it from Iran or from Russia. So if you're calculating from a strategic standpoint, saying, hey, we're going to increase our military activity and we're going to need this critical mineral from China, therefore, let's adopt a policy where we're going to do everything in our power to piss off China. Does that make sense? No.
Glenn, now to you. I wanted your take on not only what Larry said, but also how is Russia dealing with this, what seems to be Trump's approach now, which is escalate with Iran and also essentially send shockwaves throughout the global economy in a trade war with China? How is Russia dealing with this?
Well, I think it might be losing some of the initial hopes they had for Trump. As you said in the introduction, the amount of trouble he keeps bringing on himself is quite extraordinary. That is with Ukraine, the fact that he's back at supplying the weapons, intelligence, and all of this, while we learned from New York Times that this war has effectively been an American war run out of Germany. Now, of course, the negotiations aren't going well. They're responding by threatening Russia with sanctions and, again, sending more weapons. And at the same time, he has his ambitions to ethnically cleanse Gaza. He's gone to war against Yemen. The Russians are quite worried about what could happen in Iran. The consequences of going to war in Iran it would be too unpredictable, and the possible chaos would be too great. And now, of course, it's going to take on an economic war with China. It's quite absurd. So I agree with what Larry said. I think when we look at the economic warfare, it's to a large extent it's a competition to manipulate or shift the symmetry of dependence. That is, when you have two countries who are interdependent, you always have one side which is more dependent on the other. So ideally, each country would like for everyone to be dependent on them while they reduce their dependence on others. Now, you can do many things to reduce your dependence. You can have a lot of strategic autonomy, which China does, so that it is very self-sufficient, and you can also diversify your economic partnerships. The problem for Trump is that they don't really have the same strategic autonomy. They're not self-sufficient to this extent, and also they're cutting themselves off from a lot of centers of power in the world. So they're not reducing the ability to diversify. So if you look now at not just China, but the BRICS countries, which, again, Russia's leaning heavily into now, is, they have all the natural resources to do all the mining, the processing. They have all the industrial capabilities. They have their own tech centers. They have a huge market in terms of the population who wants to buy this. They're setting up new financial instruments. Across the board, BRICS can be a very self-sufficient grouping. Why this is so absurd is, again, as Larry suggested, this is the Chinese can diversify away from the US. I don't see the US being able to diversify away from China. Indeed, even the rare earth metal issues, such as antimony, is a key problem. There's not enough of it, and given that China has this and also almost completely dominates on the processing of it, so it's I just don't see how China can be beat in this economic war. And keep in mind that China has more than a tariff weapon. They can begin to dump a lot of the US debts, and they can cause a lot of problems, not just as punitive or punishing action, but indeed because they're fearful. If you think that the adversary will start to seize your funds, steal it like they did with Russia, the Europeans as well, by the way, why would you want to sit on this? I think it was Keynes who argued once, if someone owes you $100, then they have a problem. If they owe you $1 million, then you have a problem because you might not get the money. And I think this is what is concerning the Chinese as well as the Russians. So how do Russia respond? Well, I think we see this now. They don't believe anymore that Trump can deliver on a peace deal, which is largely the Europeans' fault as well. So the Russians are now building up for a massive offensive to, solve things on the battlefield if there's no diplomatic path. So a lot of things are going very wrong at the moment. So having this economic war with China on top of all of these wars, which he promised he wouldn't start, it's just a huge mess. I don't understand what the logic is behind a lot of this.
Ray, and I wanted to bring it to you because everything Glenn just said was spot on. And Sergei Ryabkov, the deputy foreign minister of Russia, recently said that he's seen no indications that the United States is moving to end the Ukraine conflict. Now Russia is calling these talks consultations. So now they're not really talking about negotiations anymore. Russia says consultations with the United States. But not only this, Ray, when Trump was elected, many people believed he was going to at least rein in some of the wars that Biden had launched essentially on multiple fronts. And I wanted to play for you before you react what Donald Trump said just a minute ago about Iran and your take on where all this is leading to.
We said the other day that we do not agree to a potential nuclear deal. It would be very dangerous for them. What specifically?
Well, they can't have a nuclear
do you mean military action there?
Absolutely.
And we have a
deadline for these talks? I do.
And
You're talking about with Iran?
Yes.
Yeah, I do.
Do you want something definitive this weekend, or do you see this as the start of a process?
It's a start.
Do you have a timeline?
We have a little time, but we don't have much time because we're not going to let them have a nuclear weapon.
So, Ray, your reaction to where we are given Donald Trump's leadership of the U.S. hegemon?
Well, Danny, all I heard from that conversation, it was very low volume, was at the end when I pressed my earpods here and I heard, we're not going to let them get a nuclear weapon. Wow.
Yes.
Talk about pushing at an open door, huh? I think Witkoff is smart enough not to push too hard at that open door. He's going to fall flat on his face. I mean, if you can say something good about the U.S. intelligence community, is that they have stood firm for 22 years ago. The Iranian supreme leader said, no nukes, we don't build nukes. And in 2007, 4 years later, the U.S. intelligence community decided unanimously with high confidence that Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon right then at the end of 2003. And if further proof were needed, that has been reaffirmed every year since, including 2 weeks ago at the annual threat assessment, saying that Khamenei, the supreme leader, has not reauthorized the program that he killed 22 years ago. Well, okay. So Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon. So when Netanyahu and Trump And everybody and his brother and sister say, we're going to make sure that Iran doesn't make a nuclear weapon. What are they trying to do? Okay. Now, the name of the game really is what Netanyahu wanted Trump to do. And that was clear. They met on Monday, okay? Netanyahu wanted Trump to bless, sotto voce if necessary, an attack on Iran. Did he get that? No. What did he get instead? We're going to start direct, says Trump, indirect, say the Iranian, talks on this very issue in Oman on Saturday. What does that mean? Well, who's going to be led? That's going to be led by Witkoff, my personal guy, says Trump. Not Rubio or that guy, Dick Tracy. What is it? Dick Tracy, Hegseth, Dick Tracy head there. No, they're not going to do that. So what's up here? There's room for talks here. I think that somebody got to Trump and said, look, did you know that the Iranians have their own deterrent now? Did you know that they successfully hit many bases in Israel? Did you know, as much as you love Israel, it's going to be destroyed? It's going to be destroyed. You hear that, Mr. Trump? It's going to be destroyed if you start a war, if you let Netanyahu start a war, you help him. What other things? There was some, well, there's a wisp in the wind here. There were reports, Reuters carried them 2 days ago, that some of the armed militias, some of the Iranian-supported people in Iraq, many of them, like 8 or 10 of them, said, we're going to hold off. We might even disarm. We don't want to pursue this anymore. Whoa. Is that a kind of an olive branch dished out by the Israelis? I don't know, but it certainly is unique and it can be explained by circumstances. But it seems to me that the Iranians are willing to deal too. The only thing necessary is for Trump to realize, as I think he has, that he's got very, very bad cards, not only on Ukraine, but on the Middle East. And that when Witkoff gets to talk to the Iranians, they're going to say, look, we said indirect. Your president said direct. They're going to be indirect, all right? What do you got? Now, I think Witkoff is going to be smart enough to find out what the Iranians really need, and he'll be on the phone with Trump. I don't know if Rubio or Waltz or that other guy, Hegseth, will be tuned in or not, but that's what's happening, and that's good. That's good because Witkoff has shown himself able to speak for Trump. He may not know much about Iran, and everybody's make a big deal of it. He doesn't have to. All he has to do is deal, and he knows the terms that Trump is willing to settle for. So I see a protracted period now, several weeks at least, of relative less anxiety with respect to whether Trump is going to let himself be sucked in, mousetrapped into supporting Netanyahu in a war that he has lots of reasons to wage against Iran.
Yeah, Larry, what's your take on where things are going with Iran? Because I'll play one more clip. Hopefully, it is a little better.
Get the volume up.
It's hard with these videos that
all of us old guys who are hard of hearing.
What?
Let's see if we can hear this.
With Iran, yeah, if it requires military, we're going to have military. Israel will obviously be very much involved in that. He'll be the leader of that. But nobody leads us. We do what we want to do.
Nobody leads us. We do what we want to do.
After he just got through saying, we'll let Israel lead.
Yes.
So he says that. So yeah, that's what I said. Trump is all over the board. So let's step back and look, objectively at what's going on. Well, the good news is Trump's only demand, the only thing he said that they wanted out of the negotiations was that Iran can't have a nuke. Iran would go, great. We don't have one. And we got Russia and China to verify that, but we will allow you, the United States, to come in and verify. So basically, Trump's going to go back to accepting the old JCPOA, which he withdrew from. Now, items to be negotiated in that are at what level for peaceful use can Iran enrich uranium. And they're doing that collaboratively with Russia as part of the Strategic Cooperation Agreement that was signed on January 17th. But Iran's coming into these negotiations in a much stronger position based upon the meetings this week in Moscow with the Chinese and the Russians. You know, they're when Iran sits down at the table, it can pull over his shoulder and say, "I'd like you to meet my two brothers, my big brothers." So Iran's not going in there with an empty hand. In the past, Trump has intimated that he was going to demand that Iran cut off all assistance to the Houthis and Hamas and Hezbollah. All of that predicated on the assumption that there's a significant amount of assistance. I would say that's questionable, but let's just go with it that would be one of the U.S. demands. It's not clear that Iran will concede on that, but the alliance that Iran signed with the Strategic Cooperative Agreement on January 17th, which the Duma approved, ratified this week, now puts that, that's envisioned at least a 20-year deal. And it's extremely important because it covers all aspects of both a military relationship that Russia has with Iran, intelligence relationship, diplomatic relationship, and economic relationship most of all. So the United States, has been pointed out by both Glenn and Ray, Donald Trump's not holding any Trump cards here. In fact, he may be able to come out and declare victory. I think one scenario I hope for is after the meeting, they're going to say, by God, we told those Iranians what the deal was, and they've agreed they're not going to build a nuclear weapon. Well, they'd already agreed not to do that. But Trump gets to take credit for their agreement. He can tout it as a diplomatic success at a time that really I think he's a little hard pressed because what he has, I've been guilty of being crude and vulgar sometime, but last night at that Republican fundraiser, where he said with respect to the 70 nations around the world that are trying to negotiate to not have the tariffs imposed, they're kissing my ass, he said. Now, I guarantee you, at least 80%, if not 100% of those countries that are lining up, as Trump claims, to kiss his ass, are not going out saying, man, let me see if I can buy some chapstick so I can maintain this kind of relationship. I love kissing Trump's ass. I think he has incentivized more countries to figure out how to join BRICS to separate from this kind of U.S. bullying and hegemonic imbecility.
No, I think those are all very good points. And Glenn, given what Larry just said too, that it seems to me that Russia, China, and Iran are really moving into a global leadership role. Larry just mentioned the nuclear talks, which have started before Donald Trump can even meet with the Iranian representatives. So, and this only touches the surface of the cooperation. What do you make of this development, this trend? And it seems like Trump is worsening this. Trump is actually making this process accelerate.
Yeah, well, these are three large giants on the Eurasian continent now. A key logic for Russia and China was that the Russians face NATO, led by the US, on its western borders. China faces the US off its coast on the east, so they kind of had to have their back-to-back as a way of staying safe. Now, it makes sense to pull in Iran to some extent into this. And indeed, you heard this coming from Tehran for a few years now, that their main strategic partnerships should be organized with Moscow and Beijing as this would allow them to set up alternative economic institutions. Indeed, this is why Iran also has been embraced now with and will gain access to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as well as BRICS. So it also makes sense now for the Russians and the Iranians to do more military cooperation, especially after the way they cooperated in Syria and also Iran's support during the Ukraine war. So they're getting much closer, and it just makes sense in order to have collectively to be able to reduce dependence on the West, but also to build up proper the defense. Now, this being said, it's worth noting that if Trump wants a political or a deal with the Iranians, that Russia could be an important partner, because Russia doesn't really want Iran to have nuclear weapons either, neither does China. So they could be important partners to observe any agreement which is made. But I think the Russians, as well as the Chinese, for that sake, they look at these efforts to renegotiate the JCPOA with the Iranians as being deeply flawed. Keep in mind that what is being asked now of Iran is largely to give up its deterrent. That is, they're arguing because, as both Ray and Larry said, they don't have a nuclear weapon. So what is it that Trump wants? Well, he doesn't want them to be a threshold state, so they have to eliminate their material capabilities. They also want them to reduce their missiles, the distance they can reach. They want them to cut support for Yemen, Hezbollah, Hamas. So effectively to give up its security and hand it over to the United States and Israel, and hope that by subordinating itself that they won't do anything bad to Iran. And this is the main problem. You can't really threaten someone to give up their deterrent, because by threatening them, you only make it clear why they need a deterrent. I mean, this should be common sense. And no, I think the partnership with China and Russia, it can work both ways. On one hand, if the US decides to increase sanctions or use military force, then they can provide some form of support. But also, if the US wants to make a deal with Iran, it's not in Russia's or China's interest to have to have Iran close down important maritime transportation corridors and shut down effectively the global economy. It's not in their interest. So they can function as a partner for peace, or they can, if the US goes to war against Iran, they would be a partner of Iran instead. So they do have an interesting role in this.
Ray, of course, the United States is at war at the moment in Yemen, and of course through its support for what is happening in Gaza and Palestine. When it comes to Yemen, though, an interesting point that's been made by many is that the United States seems to be struggling quite a bit. Even the Western mainstream media, including the New York Times, are sounding the alarm about the amount of money that is being spent and the amount of munitions that are being used to essentially fight a so-called enemy that is still showing that it can fire missiles into Israel and also chase the USS Harry Truman from the Red Sea with its drones. And I think they've downed another MQ-9 Reaper drone. I'm talking about Ansarallah. Your reaction to this not so talked about a war, as we're talking about tariffs, we're talking about Ukraine and Iran, but this is raging right now. What has been your impressions of this?
Well, first, Danny, this is a war unauthorized by Congress or by anybody else. This is a war that Trump and his military decided to wage against, it brings back memories. When was the last time we did a war against naked brown feet running through the jungle who could never contend with the United States of, I think that was called Vietnam, So what do? Oh, we sent more troops over there until we reached 536,000 troops. Now, we'll never learn because right after World War II, the French general, hero of that war, Leclerc, was sent out to Indochina to find out how many troops it would take to get Indochina back for France. And he reported dutifully after 5 months, it would take 500,000 troops. And even then, we could not do it. No. Well, it turned out to be right. Okay. So the Yemenis may have bare feet. They may have curved daggers, but they also have hypersonic missiles. Sooner or later, they're going to hit one of our ships. And they're not, the U.S. is just, the Navy is going to show itself as really not capable of doing much. Let me just finish this little thing by saying that I see that the word as phantasmagoria. I used to say other words for Trump, but I think phantasmagoria is what he's guilty. That's a highfalutin way of saying what that little kid said about the emperor in Hans Christian Andersen's tale. You know, he's got no clothes on. Nobody's willing to tell him he's got no clothes on. And let me close my little remarks here by something I just fished out from my files. 75 years old. I was just a boy at the time. But the fellow's name was Mao Zedong. He was Chinese. And this is what he said, quote, the U.S. is a paper tiger. At present, it may seem powerful, but when looked at in a broader perspective, as a whole, and from a long-term viewpoint, its policies are disliked by people right and left, because the U.S. oppresses and exploits them internally and abroad. For this reason, the tiger is doomed, period, end quote, from selected works of Mao Zedong. Okay, now, what am I saying? When I first heard that, when I first read that, I was just a young lad, of course, but come on, the U.S. will never, never suffer that kind of defeat. Well, if you have phantasmagoria, it's a real disease, then that could bring on this kind of defeat. And that's what's going to be likely, except this king, while he may have no clothes on, does have nuclear weapons. And that's why I applaud Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and others who are trying to let this king down gently. I am not in despair of an accord on Ukraine. I think it's going to come. And I also think that the talks this Saturday in Oman will bring some relief to the notion that Trump might have had intended to support Netanyahu's wish to have a war in Iran. So there are good things and there are bad things. And I think this week has more good things than bad things. Last thing I just say, it was really interesting. Monday, I was intently looking at what was going on in the White House, of course, with Netanyahu and Trump. So were the three experts from China, Russia, and Iran in the Kremlin watching the tube to see what was likely to happen. And I'm convinced that when Trump said, oh, we're going to talk to Qatar, we're going to send Witkoff over there. Well, they said, yes, finally, Trump is beginning to listen, and Netanyahu is going to go home pretty much empty-handed. Now, that may be too optimistic, but that's what I think really happened. And I have to add always that as long as Trump as president of the United States supports, enables, arms, and weaponizes genocide in Gaza, that should be the focus of every citizen, above and beyond any of these other big strategic considerations. We have to stop that. We have to make sure that this naked president realizes that we're not going to support genocide for very much longer.
Yeah, and Larry, Ray just mentioned Netanyahu's reaction. There have been videos circulating of Netanyahu's face changing when Trump said he was going to talk with Iran and announced it publicly. But I wanted your a follow-up and take on the U.S.'s overall situation in West Asia, because Trump continuously says that U.S. military force is going to be used against Iran if it doesn't essentially cave into U.S. demands, and is right now in a major military escalation war with Yemen, one that, as Ray and I have said, are causing a lot of concerns about the U.S.'s situation and its position there. Your thoughts about what's going on in West Asia and what direction this is heading, if you agree with Ray about the de-escalation that might be coming as well.
Trump would be wise to learn an old child poem, a poem for children. If wishes and butts were candy and nuts, it would be Christmas every day. Well, okay. Trump's got all these great wishes. Oh man, we've got the best military in the world. We can beat anybody. We're so strong. We're so mighty. We're going to have to boost the budget to $1 trillion now. What? And so I started looking up the inventory on certain weapon systems. The HIMARS, as an example. Guess, and Danny, this is not the place Stump the Chump, but how many HIMARS missiles a year do you think the United States produces?
Remember,
60-ish? We're the greatest industrial power ever.
60-ish?
Yeah,
less than that?
48 to 60.
40. Oh.
Okay. Now, when they fire them off in like Ukraine, they're firing out 4 or 5. So, that goes pretty quick in 12 days if you're firing 4 or 5 a day. Same with ATACMS. They only make between 200 to 500 a year. Same with Patriot missiles. So all of a sudden, you've got this limited production, and yet these ships that are sailing in to the Red Sea, they are carrying a missile that's is part of a vertical launch system, and those, once they're fired, the only way to reload those tubes, so the tubes are placed into the deck, is you'd have to sell that ship to a nearby port, and with a crane, they have to be reloaded. But the problem is they don't have an unlimited supply of those missiles. So what Trump is running up against in his Operation Rough Rider is, I guess they changed the name. I learned that today from Alex Craner. It started off in December of 23 as Operation Prosperity Guardian, was a complete bust for the Biden administration. And then here comes Trump and his team on March 15th. By God, we're not a bunch of inept incompetents like that Biden team. We're going to show those Yemenis. And since they've started the operation, the Yemenis in just the last 3 weeks have shot down 3 MQ-9 Predator drones that go out the door for at least a minimal cost of $30 million a pop. So, right there, they're almost $100 million. And reports in the media say that they're costing $1 billion. Okay, so what does this matter to the region? Well, if you're any other country in the region and you were always afraid of, man, the great and powerful Oz, he's spoken. We've seen the big head. We've heard the big voice. What they're seeing now is the curtain's getting pulled back, and the United States is more like that little old man, a nasty, malevolent little old man, mind you, behind the curtain. That, we can't stop Yemen. We have to be careful, fearful that they're going to shoot a missile and take out one of our ships. They're already shooting down our Predator drones, and those are relevant because those Predator drones are really the only kind of weapon the United States has in theater that can strike real time. From an intelligence standpoint, the drone operator can spot a mobile missile system on the ground and then use that immediately to attack that target. Without that Predator drone, the United States is basically blind. It's hit and miss. They'll never be able to locate and hit one of those mobile missile complexes. So if you're Iran, and hell, if you're Saudi Arabia or anybody else, you look at the United States going, what the, they're not actually as good as they said they were. And that's not the message Trump wanted to convey, but that's a message that's being sent. So Trump he's going to be learning a hard lesson in the next few weeks, particularly if he decides to attack Iran, that the United States military is not as competent and capable as he thinks it is.
Yeah, Glenn, your comments on what you're witnessing. I know you have written a lot about Eurasia, speak a lot about Eurasia and the development of this multipolar world. What's your reaction to this point that Larry made? Because for me, as an American, you understand the United States views it's an empire, and military superiority, the ability to project power militarily is critical. Not only critical, but actually it's almost dependent on it now. But yet, as Larry just intimated and demonstrated, this is waning itself, despite Trump's rhetoric that the United States is so strong and has the biggest and strongest weapons. What have you made of this, and how does it, shape how you're viewing what's happening in West Asia right now?
Well, I think the example from Yemen is quite clear that the United States is exhausting itself, if not even disarming itself. And this is the key problem. As Larry pointed out, these are very expensive weapons. It takes a lot of work to reload. Let's use that word. But overall, I think it fits into what many people predicted. That is, in the beginning of the 90s, when the United States was looking at what kind of an international system should be built after the Cold War. The idea was to have one based on hegemony, dominance, and part of the idea was that no countries should even be able to aspire towards competing against the United States. So this image of absolute dominance and superiority, it's really at the core of the global hegemon, exactly because no one will even try to match the US because it is so powerful. This isn't that different from what Israel does in the region either. That is, it can get away with a lot because if it has this image of being all powerful and effectively destroying anyone who goes against it, this image it often can result in not having to use force if everyone fears that you have overwhelming force. Now, over time, of course, the United States, as many predicted from the 90s, it will begin to exhaust itself. That is, when you transfer all this wealth and resources from the core to the periphery. And I think, this is what you see now. And as the United States weakens itself, the rest of the region is also taking a note, as it's not, decimating, destroying Yemen. Instead, they see that the US has a lot of weaknesses. And what does this mean for the hegemonic system? Well, global primacy or hegemony, it really depends on alliance systems, because you divide the world into your adversaries, which are contained, and your allies, which become dependent. So this is why it's good to keep Europe divided, to keep the Germans and Russians on the opposing side. This is why it's concerning if peace breaks out in the Middle East in terms of the Arabs and Iran getting along. But the alliance system has also been kept alive because the belief that the US will have the final say in any major security issue. But as we say now, if they can't defeat the Houthis in Yemen, why would you entrust your security? Why would you outsource your foreign policy? So I think America's hand is being weakened across the Middle East. So, and I think in this vacuum you're going to have a lot of multipolar alternatives, which is why China has been pushing for ending some of this rivalry between, for example, Saudi Arabia and Iran, simply because that would diminish the whole alliance system, which has divided the region. So, no, I see. Yeah, I think everyone more or less now recognizes that the era of global hegemony has come to an end. Even Marco Rubio pointed this out, that this time is now over, and I think this should be more reflected in America's military policy. There was a time when America prided itself of carrying a big stick and speaking softly. Now the stick is becoming much smaller and while spouting a lot of vulgarities. So I think I think America needs to go back to its roots. So rebuild its strength and not deplete all its resources.
I just want to remind everyone, if you're watching, do hit the like button. That helps boost the video out further. Ray, I wanted to get you back in here, and Glenn, I know that you have to leave at the hour, so please do feel free to do that if you need to. But Ray, I wanted to ask you a final comment on this question of U.S. military power projection in West Asia. You've briefed U.S. presidents. And what would you say to them now about this, the consequences of an attack on Iran, given what we have witnessed with U.S. warfare and aggression on Yemen?
Thanks, Danny. But before Glenn leaves, let me ask him a question, since he's the only one of us who has met with Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. I think it matters. What's your take on him, Glenn? How did he come across to you?
Putin.
Yeah.
Well, he's on that topic. That Theodore Roosevelt. I think this is, to some extent, I think what he's following as well is attempting to speak more softly, but also carrying a big stick. And indeed, you do see that when he addresses the audience, he's quite courteous. He avoids too belligerent language. I mean, he kept referring to the Western countries as partners long into the proxy war, even as we call him Hitler, and there's evil in his eyes. So so I think the politeness is there. I mean, and even various American presidents and political leaders around the world have recognized that he's also very, very smart. He knows what he's doing. So I think he's careful not to close the door to possible peaceful solutions. And I think this is one of the things we gotten wrong with Putin. We always got this idea that Putin is simply this KGB thug representing him as always looking to beat up his adversaries. But I think this narrative neglects how many times over his 25 years at the presidency, when he has attempted to reach out and find some political settlement with the West. But as Putin has said many times as well, the main reason, the main source of all conflicts between the West and Russia was this failure after the Cold War to set up a mutually acceptable post-Cold War settlement. That is, we kept the dividing lines, but then gradually moved them towards the east instead of getting rid of them. And this has been the source of why everything's been, all European affairs has become a zero-sum game. This is why when we talk about European integration, it means decoupling countries from Russia, even though it's the largest country in Europe. So I think I think it's a guy who can deal with. This is now we're not really allowed to say this. I mean, if someone journalist from my country is watching this, I will be a Putinist in the paper tomorrow. But even Bill Clinton made this point, that he always kept his word. When he said he would do something, he did it. So it's a person that you could work with. And these days, of course, we keep saying that Putin is that he breached all trust. It's not a man we can work with because we can't trust him. But why? Well, because he invaded Ukraine. But that's proof you can't trust him. He said, we will take military force unless you give us some security guarantees. you can't move in. NATO can't move into Ukraine without giving us security guarantees. We will take action. He did exactly what he said he would. So we're not. It's not his trustworthiness. He did what he said he would. So no, I think. Again, you can quote many Western leaders who pointed this out. You can work with him. He does what he says, and so I think, demonizing him. I think it was Henry Kissinger. He said it back in 2014. I think that the demonization of Putin is not a policy; it's an absence of thereof. So I think this is the best way to understand it. So that's why I think the demonization of Putin, almost as a loyalty pledge in the West now, is one of our greatest weaknesses.
I agree. Now, let me just point out that I think that you might be called a Putin versteher. Okay. Now, I take some solace in the notion that Angela Merkel is saying, I am a Putin versteher. It's stupid not to understand Putin. And she said, the West played a role in what happened in Ukraine. So there's a little bit of lessening of this Putin versteher thing. And I hope that your colleagues in Norway give you a little slack there and don't brand you right off the bat as being kind of a leper, as has happened here. Well, thanks very much. You, as I say, have dealt with Putin, or you've been with him, and that's really important. What I would say on this is that, we were the hegemon. When the Soviet Union fell apart, Putin reached out. They even asked Clinton, "Is it okay if I join NATO?" And Clinton said, what? Oh, let me talk with my team. God, comes back and says, oh, my team says no. Okay. So what I'm saying here is that hegemony is over for the United States, and that's something we have to get rid of. Now, after our only, in my memory, since World War II, win war against feckless Iraq in 1991, Paul Wolfowitz, Deputy Secretary of Defense, was asked by a prominent general, what's the lesson you learned from that? Great job, Paul, way to go. And Paul said, well, the lesson we learned for that is that we could do these things and the Russians can't stop us. That's a quote, okay? Well, that was 1991. Then we decided to do Iraq in 2003. Did the Russians stop us? No, they couldn't stop us then. What happened in Syria 2015? The Russians stopped us for the nonce for the next several years. The Russians can stop us now. As a matter of fact, I've been around a while, so maybe this would make an impression when I say that for the first time in my professional career, the Russians are better than us in weaponry. Now, strategic weaponry, that's kind of, going to use that anyway, and we're equal in that. But all kinds of other weaponry, not only the Russians, but the Chinese have caught up. And that's a shift in the balance of defensive power, okay? And so when you go back to Mao Zedong and he says, this is a paper tiger, well, the problem is that the paper tiger has become a paper tiger, but it doesn't realize it, and it still has nuclear weapons. So no longer can we work our will wherever we want without the Russians stopping us and the Chinese stopping us. And that plays a big role in the Persian Gulf. And in my view, the Russians and the Chinese, through private channels, are telling Trump, look, don't even think of letting Netanyahu mousetrap you into a war against Iran.
Can I add one quick thing? Because I feel for 30 years, the main discussion we've had, or one of the key discussions about European security architecture, or indeed the global world order, was, is hegemony a good thing or a bad thing? So good, we meant, it's allows us to elevate, liberal democracy, to mitigate security competition, all of this. Against, of course, was it excessively dependent on coercion, and so you get Iraq and this kind of disasters. But now, we would this discussion can be retired, because it's not whether or not it's good or bad. It's objectively over. This is what indeed Mark Rubio also recognizes. The unipolar order is over. So we have multipolarity. And that means there has to be a real shift in policy if we recognize that this is the case. Because under unipolarity, the main idea was, well, we don't have to really accommodate Russian security concerns. They might, as the Clinton administration recognized, they might be very upset with us if we expand NATO. But again, who cares? We're all dominant. They're weak. We don't have to take into consideration. And in just to do one more Henry Kissinger quote, because he also wrote in 2014 that he was a bit taken aback or about how the rhetoric was now focused around the idea of defeating Russia. And he was making the argument that if we recognize that Russia is a great power, which he believed they were, then we have to look at ways, the areas where our key main strategic interests can be harmonized. Where can we actually make a deal? This is the main direction of diplomacy, instead of taking solace in the idea that we don't have to take into consideration their security concerns. So I think this is, given we know that hegemony is over, we have to recognize the main security concern of other great powers. This is just, it should be common sense, but I don't see anyone moving in this direction. And you need the Americans, the Chinese, and the Russians especially to come together and map out how we cannot step on each other's toes, because well, not me, I'm not part of any of these great powers, but the Americans and Russians and Chinese certainly are. So no, I think this is the direction that we should be going. But there's still a behavior as if we're living in the unipolar order, even though there's a recognition that it's gone.
Yeah, let me follow up on that. As far as the United States is, and Trump in particular, they're ignoring the principle that your actions help inspire, motivate, or deter what other people do. And what the United States has posted on the White House webpage with respect to the tariffs is, they say explicitly that other countries have been getting a free ride from the United States because we've been providing military security around the world. Now, I think the people in Iraq and Afghanistan and Somalia and Libya and Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos, they might disagree with that characterization, but let's just go with it. And that therefore, these countries, they ought to be getting out their checkbooks and writing a check to the United States because we're so great and they need to pay us back for everything we've done. Now, that attitude, in my experience, will lead people to not say, you know what, I want to be friends with the United States. They are such great people. They're generous, they're kind, and they're going to leave us the hell alone. It's just the opposite. These people are now being, it's the mafia tactic. They come, you're running a deli or you're running a dry cleaner, and the two guys show up and say, hey, you need to pay your security tax. And the guy goes, I don't have a problem. Oh, you do now. They start breaking things up and punching them in the face. And then the store owner pays up and he gets left alone for a while. That's what the United States is doing. It's a form of loan sharking. And you can only get away with that for so long because all these other countries are going to go, whoa, wait a second. This is why China, Russia, India, Brazil, South Africa started BRICS. That's why Iran's coming into BRICS. That's why Iran and Russia signed that part of that security cooperative, their comprehensive security agreement entails the North-South corridor, the transport corridor, that's going to free Russia of being dependent upon choke points in the Dardanelles or in the Baltic Sea. And I anticipate, look at Vietnam. Vietnam thought, the United States, we're now buddies. And man, United States savaged them with tariffs. And there was that little thing called the Vietnam War where, probably a couple of million Vietnamese got killed by us, that they may not be as forgiving about that as we think. So all I'm saying is that what Trump's actions, whatever short-term benefit he thinks it's going to gain in the United States, it is going to lead to an acceleration of BRICS as a viable economic alternative and a weakening of U.S. Hegemonic influence in the world.
I just want to say, everyone, be sure to hit the like button as you continue watching. I want to say, Glenn, if you do need to go at the hour, feel free. If you want to stay, you can stay. That's great. Yes, Ray.
Quick question to Glenn. Norway is part of Europe, right? What's your take on the misbehavior of the Europeans? Do you think that if Trump really wants to do a deal with Putin on Ukraine, that the West Europeans have the wherewithal to put the kibosh on it?
Well, I don't quite understand the rationale at the moment, because the idea is, if the United States is going to pull away from this war, then the Europeans should fill the shoes, effectively. This is the idea, but it's a very strange proposition, because we already ran out of weapons to send, and if we couldn't defeat the Russians with America, obviously we're not going to do it with the Americans, and they also never really defined what it means to defeat the world's largest nuclear power either. It's who considers this to be a fight for its existence. So there's a lot of flaws behind this, and also there's a lot of deceptive language being used. So, for example, if you look in the papers here, you have our politicians and media writing, well, Europe, we have to take an important role in any ceasefire. We can contribute by sending in troops once the ceasefire starts, and this is sold as a way of helping to ensure that there's a proper ceasefire, but it's very deceptive, because this is a way of sabotaging the ceasefire, because there's no way Russia, which invaded for the very explicit purpose of preventing soldiers from NATO countries from entering Ukraine, that somehow they're going to accept that the Europeans move in. And this is one of their main concerns. If there is a ceasefire, that the British and other Europeans will send troops into Ukraine and set them up as tripwires. So this is a way of sabotaging it. There's some push now that maybe France should speak, or Macron should go and speak to Putin. And but I don't know. It's very strange. There's this assumption that this is this is a moral thing not to talk to the opponents, even as hundreds of thousands of young men die on the front, and they're fighting in a war which most Ukrainians want negotiations, but still they're convinced in their own moral superiority that by not talking to Putin, then this is reaffirms how good we are. And if we do talk to him, it's a way of rewarding. So, no, I'm a bit disheartened by the very unconstructive role played by Europe. And this is with Trump in the room, he's the sensible person here, which is not put Europe in a very good light.
Thanks.
Larry, let's bring you back in here. And we can maybe close the show's last 20 or so minutes with this analysis of the overall situation. When Trump came into office, there was some optimism about, okay, at the very least, can we prevent a global conflagration, a massive one, a potential World War III scenario when it comes to Russia, the US, and perhaps that would bring some stability in the world. But of course, we've seen lots of contradictions in those talks there and how Trump's addressed it. We've also now seen the United States escalate in West Asia to a significant degree. Now we're talking regularly about a possible war with Iran.
Yeah.
And of course, this $1 trillion military budget has already been very vocally targeted by people like Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump at China, not least the moving now of whatever naval resources are left of the United States, even to the Panama Canal. So there's all kinds of saber rattling and threat of war out there. What have you made of all of this? Can Trump, because it seems like the United States under Trump is still operating on the assumption that it can arrest these major rising powers to the east, and that it can do so through the mechanism of war. What's your take on this?
Trump's unpredictable conduct is making it easier for other countries to say, look, we don't know what the hell the United States is going to do. We can't predict what Trump is going to do. We don't know if he'll follow through on his verbal threats or not. So what we have to do is we have to take care of our interests first and foremost, and would not rely upon any promise given by Trump. It's going to have to be completely demonstrated and verified. So in that respect, Russia remains open to talking to the United States. They have not shut the door. They still keep open the lines of communication based upon things that Trump has said, based upon what the United States has done in terms of supplying intelligence to Ukraine, that's been, and intelligence and weapons that have been used to carry out attacks inside of Russia. Russia would be fully entitled to tell the United States to go to hell and to either stop it, or they're going to start shooting our reconnaissance planes down, for starters. I mean, and there are those in Russia actually demanding that Putin do that. So Trump has demonstrated he's not listening to the Russians. He's still saying, well, they got to make concessions. No, they don't. They're winning. In fact, they're offensive. People are expecting a big offensive. It's in my judgment, it's already started. The Russians just aren't going to announce it with a gender reveal party. Okay, they're the speak softly but carry a big stick crowd, and they're advancing all along the line of contact from north to south. So Trump, despite his promise that he'd get this thing settled in 24 hours and, maybe 100 days, Russia's not going to settle, because the United States is not willing to make the kinds of concessions that the United States needs to make in order to convince Russia that we're a reliable negotiating partner. And Russia will retake what's now what we knew as Novorossiya, and they will fully occupy all of Ukraine up to the Dnieper River before this is done. And the United States won't be able to do a damn thing about it.
Yeah, and Ray, this has reverberations for the entire world. What's happening, especially on the battlefield, where Russia is continuing to go on the offensive, showing that this is going to be a long process. I know that you believe eventually a deal will be done, but it seems like it's going to take some time. And we also have now Trump dealing very aggressively with Iran and with China. And the fear was during the Biden administration that all of this would lead to an even worse outcome than what we already had, which was a genocide in Gaza, on the precipice of war, possibly Israel at least led and U.S. facilitated with Iran, and of course ongoing and potentially disastrous direct confrontation with Russia. What's changed in your mind about this situation now under Trump? It seems like while some of the form of it has changed, that there's been a lot of continuity.
You're on mute.
Here.
There you go.
Whoops.
You're back. You're back.
Yeah, you're back.
Don't tell my wife how to mute me, please.
Yeah.
Okay. I think Larry is right that unpredictability is the byword here. But you have prominent Russian officials saying, look, We were close to World War III under Biden, Blinken, Sullivan, and those people. Okay, now we're not. As a matter of fact, I have to emphasize that just a week ago or so now, maybe 10 days, when Putin was up there in Murmansk on a submarine and talking to the sailors, and they're asking him questions. And he says, look, in my opinion, Trump is worthy of trust. That's in my opinion. We can deal with trust, in my opinion. Same paragraph twice, in my opinion. And then he says, Nadeus, I hope that this is not going to end up like last time when we get diddled by Trump. All these betrayals that you know about, which he had already rehearsed earlier in his little talk. Now, Deus, the word for I hope, really means I expect. Okay, I assure you. Okay, it was a bad translation by the Kremlin. I assure you, this is not going to happen again. Okay, now what does that mean? That means that Putin is winning the war, and that Trump is a transactional guy, smart enough to realize that his cards are really, really poor cards, and he's going to have to play. Does Trump want a deal? I believe Trump does want a deal. So does Putin. Okay. Now, this matter of trust, my God, that has been absent since 2013, when Obama and Putin trusted each other enough to avoid a major war in Syria. Okay, we know that story. That's 2013. 2014, 6 months later, the likes of Victoria Nuland did that coup in Kiev, and then trust plummeted. Now they're talking about it again. And Putin, despite people behind him, the military behind him, the people that say, oh, you're trusted too much, and despite Putin's own admission, yeah, you're right, I made a mistake. I trusted these guys in the past. Now he keeps saying, I trust these. In my opinion, they're serious about working out a deal. What does that mean? It means he wants a deal rather than just go ahead and complete his conquering of Ukraine. He wants the kind of mutual security deal that was possible back in December of 2021, and that Jens Stoltenberg, head of NATO, bragged about, saying, we said no to that deal. And so Putin said, okay, then I will invade Ukraine. And so he did. And what does Stoltenberg then say? He says, and the good news is that we got NATO enlargement anyhow. Sweden and Finland. Okay, so much for that. Now, it doesn't matter to Stoltenberg that the flower of Ukrainian youth is dead now because of these stupid decisions. I think that Putin has enough trust. I use the word advisedly because Putin does, and that Trump will come around to say, well, look, I got very poor hands here, but Putin's willing me to, well, let's say Odessa could become an international port or something. He's willing to give me enough to let me down easy. I'll take it. Okay. I think that's what's in store for Ukraine. It's going to take a month or two more, in my view, maybe more. But meanwhile, the focus is on Iran. And I think Putin and Xi and their trilateral meeting there in Moscow, the day after Netanyahu was in the White House, they breathed a sigh of relief and said, okay, now Qatar is next. Let's see what happens on Saturday. See if Trump and Witkoff, his Rasputin, if you will, or his guy, is going to come to any more sensible arrangement. And I think they are. And I'm breathing a lot easier this week than I was just about 10 days ago.
Glenn, I'm glad you're still here. Give your impression, anything that you want to react to with what was just outlined here.
No, not really. Sorry. No, I just think that yeah, a lot of the same mistakes are being done over and over again. We spoke about this idea that Iran can be threatened to give up its deterrent and security. We say the same now with BRICS. That is, Trump says, if you dare to diversify away from the dollar, I'll put tariffs on everyone. I mean, and we'll put sanctions on you. It only proves the need to diversify, to reduce the excessive dependence on the dollar. And I think it's we're going to see the same now on the battlefield in Ukraine. I mean, Marco Rubio made the point that if the Russians really want peace, then they wouldn't attack. But there is no ceasefire in place. The idea seems to be that if Russia wants peace, then it should suspend all hostilities on the battlefield until there's an agreement. But then the incentive for making peace to accept a political settlement, which is very difficult to get acceptance for both in Ukraine and across the West, is gone. So we have all these very strange ideas, and now now the Europeans again, as I said, are gonna threaten to send troops. Everyone's gonna arm themselves to the teeth and try to send as much weapons as possible to Ukraine. All it does is convince the Russians that there is no reliable avenue towards a negotiated peace agreement. So this is why they're building up for now an offensive. And I agree with what Larry said, by the way, that this has probably already begun, because there's some huge movements which you see in the Donbass area, but also coming up from the south in Zaporozhye, that there's huge movements already underway. So I think this is a snowball which will only intensify. So it's quite possible that it's already begun. So no, it's very frustrating to watch this. It's a lot of things which should be common sense, such as don't threaten a country to give up its deterrent. It's that this won't work. It should be obvious, but for some reason it's not so.
Yeah, and Larry, with what Glenn just said, it made me think about how I think a lot of people actually underestimate the strength of now these three countries that are consistently on the US's radar, essentially the three biggest countries that the United States wants to contain and weaken, and with Russia, China, and Iran. What do you say to those people? Because a lot of people get frustrated. Iran hasn't launched Operation True Promise 3. Why hasn't Russia toppled and destroyed, Ukraine's army 100% completely and just gotten this over with? Why is China continuing to play a balancing act economically and otherwise? What do you say to those people, given that you now have and especially in recent years, extensive experience traveling to Russia, all of that?
Yeah, so let's come up with benchmarks. Let's use the United States experience in Afghanistan as a benchmark. After 20 years, the United States failed to take control and contain the Taliban, who were armed only with sidearms, a few mortars, and a few heavy machine guns. They had no artillery, no tanks, no armor, no air power. And they essentially fought us to a standstill for 20 years. So I don't want to hear a single former U.S. general open their mouth at any kind of criticism of Russia, because what Russia has done is the progress in the Donbass has been slow through Luhansk, but particularly Donetsk, because the Ukrainians had 8 years in which to build up fortifications, underground, heavily fortified mines and other facilities that Russia has been slow in taking in order to avoid significant casualties on its side, but in the process inflicting significant casualties on the side of the Ukrainians. So, all these Westerners say, see, Russia's weak because they're not moving fast. Hey, who the hell are you to talk? Petraeus, Ben Hodges. I mean, we go down the list of all these clowns. They couldn't beat the Taliban, a bunch of goat herders with automatic rifles. So it's like, shut up. You've got no room to talk. So the Russians, they're in no competition. They're in no hurry. What's fascinating is, we can go back over the history of the last 3 years. You remember in the first year, we were told every month, oh, Russia's running out of missiles. Any day now, they're running out. Next week, they're going to be out, out, gone, zero. Russia kept building. When the M777 howitzer was introduced, that's going to be a game changer. Now we find out that not only is the United States not producing any more of them, so they don't have any, and they can't produce enough artillery shells to keep the Ukrainians in stock, and they don't have replacement barrels because the barrels have been burned up. Then you get the same story with the TACMs, with the HIMARS, with the Patriots, all the Wunderwaffen, the F-16s. The United States has thrown everything, including intelligence, including targeting information. And it has not stopped the Russians. And in fact, Cavoli, while not trying to admit the reality, the general in charge of European Command, in his testimony before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee last week, conceded that, Russia's lost all these people, so they claim, and yet we can go over the history of U.S. military, has not gotten any damn estimates right. Going to Vietnam, to Afghanistan, they've always gotten it wrong, usually doubling and tripling the estimate when it's, much less. But conceded that despite losses, the Russians are recruiting at a rate of 30,000 a month. Their army has grown to be 1.5 million. Yeah, they lost all these tanks and vehicles, except they've replaced them all. Their industrial capability is such that they can replace everything. While the United States, we don't even build Bradley fighting vehicles anymore, so we can't replace those. And Russia's producing 1,500 tanks a year, while the United States is producing 50. And those are actually not brand new tanks. Those are, they're taking the 1967 Mustang and sprucing it up, putting new paint on it, new wheels, some lights. But so the disconnect here is profound. And it's going to come as a wake-up shock to Europe, to the United States, when Russia finishes off the victory against Ukraine. That's where it's headed.
Larry, Ray, last but not least, maybe you can help summarize this direction that the United States is headed, not just under Trump, but as a hegemon as a whole in its current, not just a foreign policy direction, but where you see things headed as it navigates all of the dynamics that all three of you have laid out during this conversation.
Well, I would say this, that there is an argument for stability from the fact that Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, we have a 4-point axis of evil now, right, are supremely confident that they can deal with the United States if they have to, okay? That's why Putin is going in a very measured way in Ukraine. That's why the Chinese and the Russians are willing to convene in Moscow with Iranian delegations of experts to see what happens at the White House. And North Korea, that has not even been mentioned. I think I should mention that. What about North Korea? Well, it surprised the hell out of me on 2 counts. One is, more than 2 years ago, we discovered that Russia gave North Korea its next to the best intercontinental ballistic missile ICBM called Topol-M. Range, all of the United States. Sophistication, chaff, other things that you wouldn't believe to get these things through, decoys and so forth. Tested, twice tested now. What happened? It was ignored by U.S. intelligence. Ted Postal, a friend of ours, published on this under the auspices of the Institute for Strategic Studies. Okay, so Jake Sullivan is asked at a White House briefing, "What about the Topol M? My God, what? Oh yeah, we're aware of that. We're looking into that. That was 2 years ago. Okay, what am I saying here? I'm saying that Russia gave North Korea one of its most sophisticated ICBMs, which has the range of and get the capability of getting it through any defense the United States has. Okay, why was that? My God. Well, what else? A defense treaty. Not only a defense treaty, but a stronger defense treaty than the one with Iran. This is actually a mutual defense treaty where each side is obligated to come to the aid of the other in case the other is attacked. Okay. Article 4, Putin advertises, hey, we have this thing with North Korea. Article 4 is like the Article 5 in the NATO treaty. Okay. Why is all that? Well, I'm surprised. I used to think the North Koreans were a little bit more mercurial than the Russians would do these kinds of things, but they've done it. And that's the threat that Putin has acknowledged. He needs really strong allies, not only China, not only people like Ukraine, like the Iranians, but people like North Korea, who now have the capability to deter just about anything that the U.S. or South Korea might throw at them. So we used to talk about the correlation of forces in the old Soviet Union. It's changed. And the reason that I am hopeful that this can all end peaceably is that that a transactional Witkoff and Trump are smart enough to know when they don't have the high cards, and they're smart enough to back off. And it'll be hard, but the realities will appear, and they will back off starting this Saturday in Qatar, when we see this. The U.S. has not let Netanyahu run U.S. policy toward Iran. Now, am I sure of that? Of course I'm not. Let 100 flowers bloom. But I think that this past week gives us some reason to not despair, but rather to say, well, those people are not only very strong, the balance of power has shifted not only in their direction, but they're so supremely confident that they're going to come out of this okay, that they don't worry too much about what the U.S. is going to do. And when they do worry, they make sure their views are heard, and you get things like Trump naming Witkoff to go talk to whom? To the foreign minister of Iran. Direct, Trump says, these are direct talks. The head of Peshkashian, head of Iran, says, no, they're not. They're indirect talks. We've always insisted on indirect talks, and that's what they're going to be. Well, is Witkoff going anyway? Of course he is. Let's see what happens, and call me if I'm wrong, and assume we all survive. But I think that there's more hope this week than 10 days ago, and I'm happy that there are 100 flowers blooming here, and we'll see.
Well said. Well said. Gentlemen, it was great to be with you. Just a few announcements. Be sure to hit the like button before you head out of here. That will help keep this stream going. Leave a comment, if you will. You can find all of Larry, Glenn, and Ray's links below, where you can find their work. You can find Glenn's YouTube channel, Ray's Twitter, as well as our X account, as well as Larry's Countercurrents program, all of which are must to check out. Last but not least, before I ask you guys if you want to say anything before we head out, tomorrow I will be hosting Scott Ritter and Professor Mohammed Marandi to talk about Iran.
Wow,
we're going to work out some things and have, I think, a really lively conversation. 1 p.m. Eastern, April 10th. Be sure to be there. Without further ado, though, gentlemen, anything you want to add before we head out of here?
I'm good.
I'm good.
All right. Okay.
Thanks, Danny.
Thanks so much, everyone. Take care. I'll see you all tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye now.